A 4 years after the publication of Dune, Frank Herbert released its first sequel, Dune Messiah, in 1969. It was a departure from the first book in many ways, including its length. Messiah is less than half as long as the original Dune. But it also works against the heroic structure of the first novel, as Paul Atreides deals with the difficulties of rule and contends with a conspiracy to undo all that he's achieved. The story begins 12 years after the end of the previous novel. Many of the characters from the original are carried over here. Chani, Stilgar, and especially Paul's younger sister Alia are all prominently featured. But with no Harkonnens, the author introduces a new set of antagonists, including the face dancer Scytale and the guildsman Edric. While the blend of new characters with the established cast does bring something fresh to the story, the real joy is in checking in with the familiar characters from the first novel and seeing how they've developed over the years. As Emperor Paul struggles with the need to produce an heir, which is weighed against his understanding of where that will eventually lead, he wrestles with the violence that occurs throughout the universe in his name. He has to negotiate complex political situations and resist the influence of the bureaucracies and the religion that have sprouted up around him. Dune Messiah was a disappointment to some readers when it first came out and continues to be divisive among fans today. There is a notable difference in the style of this book when compared to the first, with more subtle and esoteric storytelling, but the story is also much smaller in scope with fewer big action sequences. Many of the most compelling elements occur off-page and are only alluded to rather than depicted directly in the novel. It's more of a political thriller, with the mystery being precisely where and when the threat to Paul and his family will emerge. It serves to wrap up many of the character arcs from the first book, but it also sets up a new set of threads that will be explored in the subsequent novels, as the series gets even weirder and more metaphysical as it moves forward. The first time I read Dune Messiah, it was from this Ace Trade paperback edition that matches my other copies of the initial trilogy. It aligns with the first cover, with a lone figure atop a pyramid in front of the two moons in blue, with the vertical title in pale white with red accents. The title page matches the first book, and this one begins immediately after a brief introduction from the author's son, Brian Herbert. While the first book had extensive back matter, Messiah has none. The printing quality continues to be a touch problematic in these Ace editions, and my own copy suffers from an annoying echo effect. So when I had the chance to upgrade to a more deluxe illustrated hardcover copy of the novel, I decided to go for it. So let's do this. Here we have Dune Messiah from the Folio Society. This version was released in 2023 and is presented in a black illustrated slipcase with shaped edges to accommodate the curve of the book's spine. Like many of the other aspects of the design that we'll see in a moment, this is an attempt to keep the book in series with the first Dune novel, which I'll keep handy here for reference. This time, the line work on the slipcase is in copper or gold rather than silver as it was for the first book. We have the sand dunes of Arrakis against a night sky on one side, but they look more like ocean waves on the other. Some interesting symbolic possibilities there. The book itself is bound in a metallic copper-colored cloth that feels just like the first book, with a dramatic portrait illustration on the front. The image is of Alia Atreides in gray tones. She is a political and mystical spiritual leader and is dressed in an ornate costume. The veil she wears recalls the final image from the previous book, and a similar speckled foil pattern, this time in gold, seems to move up the cover, culminating in this Maudib mouse. It reminds me of Sam Weber's drawing from the first book in that the tail curls in such a way as to almost complete the symbol for infinity. On the spine, the author and publisher name are recessed in green rather than blue this time, while the title is flush in black with the same gold speckle from the cover image. The binding is appropriately finished with green head and tail bands. If we crack the book open, we see the same illustrated end papers with a map of Arrakis by Martin Saunders that were used in the first book, but coming in at a slightly different color. On the reverse of this, next to the half title, are the exact same cartographic notes for the map. The book is printed on Abbey wove paper and was bound in Italy, while my copy of the first book was bound in Germany. There is no table of contents, but the fonts and the layouts are the same, including this simple design element which denotes the chapter epigraphs from the rest of the text. If we bring back the Ace edition for a brief side-by-side, we can see that the Folio Society version is indeed bigger, with an extra 4 centimeters in the height and 2.5 centimeters in the width. The font size is larger in the Folio version, with more lines per page and even more generous margins. With the consistency issues in the paperback version, there's a marked improvement when it comes to the readability of the Folio edition, which features precise printing on thicker, warmer paper. The font size in the Folio version of Messiah is also larger than it was in their version of Dune, because it's a shorter book, so there's just more room. There is no biography for the contributors to this edition, nor is there an exclusive introduction. The interior artwork, like the cover art, is by Hilary Clark. She's an artist that has illustrated for other publishers and has done some work with the Folio Society before. Her artwork typically features dynamic and almost surreal elements, but here she has the task of matching the style established by artist Sam Weber, who tends to be more realistic but also more sterile in his work. In Dune Messiah, Miss Clark provided color artwork and 10 black and white illustrations. Let's take a quick look at the black and white art first. These small drawings that appear above some chapters are done with ink and charcoal, like this one of the entrance to the temple for the shrine of Duke Leto's skull. They occur once every few chapters and make for a great visual treat when encountered during the reading. In my opinion, they often exceed those found in the first book in terms of the detail and composition. They're really good. Hilary Clark also provides 8 color illustrations done in oil on panel. They are presented on thicker, textured paper and typically land within 5 pages from the text they correspond to. Let's take a detailed look at the color artwork now. The first illustration is of Paul Atreides as he walks the streets of Arrakeen as the sun sets. He follows a group of pilgrims to his sister Alia's fane, a temple where she emerges and performs a ceremony for the large crowd gathered there. Paul is familiar with the ceremony itself, but this is his first time seeing it from the pilgrim's perspective. He is set apart from the crush of the crowd in this image, as he's in the light, while the pilgrims are cast in blue shadow. Paul is also masked, with his eyes open, watching the ceremony, while those in the crowd all have their eyes closed, as they experience a form of spiritual rapture. Right from this first illustration, Paul is depicted as separate from his people. The second illustration is of Edric, the guild steersman. He floats in a container that swirls with melange gas. Edric is an elongated humanoid figure with finned hands and feet. He's part of the 4-pronged conspiracy against Paul Atreides, and his prescient powers as a guildsman protect the conspiracy from being seen by Paul's own prescience. This may be his speaking globe, which hovers around the tank. Through the orange wisps and eddies, his fellow conspirator Princess Aurelion can be seen in her blue whale fur robe and hat. The lighting effects are especially strong here. The third piece is a portrait of Hate. The artwork matches the text's description, as he stands in the throne room in his orange robes. The details on this quilted section down the middle are fantastic. Hate is described with a rather flat face beneath curly black hair, and is dark of feature. His metal eyes have a mechanical stare, but the expression is of a gentle and serene smile. The columns that frame him and the white light behind him add impact to the reveal of this character, who's presented to Paul as a gift. He is a Tleilaxu Gola, a being reconstructed from the dead flesh of the original, and he plays an important role in the plot of the novel. The fourth image is a double-page spread, and it features Alia as she investigates mysterious human remains. In stillsuit and mask, she crouches with her elbows on her knees, her chin on her fists, as she tries to understand what happened to the corpse before her. Desert rocks and a wheat-colored sky fill the image as 3 attendants wait to the side until she completes her investigation. It isn't just this murder that weighs on Alia, but the faith and reverence that these attendants have in her. They are confident that she'll be able to read a strange truth in the scene, even as it remains a total and unsettling mystery to her. The next illustration is of the Reverend Mother Gaius Helen Mohiam, who has been summoned by Paul and moves through the vaulted passages of the Citadel to have an audience with the Emperor. Although she's surrounded by Fremen guards, she works to appear patient and confident. From the triangular windows to the tiled floors, Hilary Clark has captured all the elements of this scene in her composition. The sixth image is of Scytale in disguise. Again, the illustrator is precise when it comes to translating the text into an image. The messenger girl appears before Paul in a wine-colored robe. She's said to have dark skin, large blue whiteless eyes, a delicate chin, a cheerless mouth, with her hair held back by a band of the same material as her robe. But it is with these shape-shifting effects that Hilary Clark gets to push things to the next level. The layers of illusion move around the female figure like slices of living technological clay. Scytale's face-dancing transformation is described as shape flowing into shape, flesh moving and readjusting, and with the echo of a face here and the fluid curls here, the effect is beautifully and perfectly imagined. This is easily my favorite of the bunch. The seventh image is of a big moment near the end of the novel. The scene is so clear in Paul's oracular vision that he finds himself following the script exactly. A stone burner detonates in the city streets. Paul looks out at the devastation with smoke, ash, and flame, while a trooper kneels, covering his ruined eyes. The composition of this illustration is clever, with a leaning structure in the foreground. In the background, buildings crumble, and Paul is the only figure of strength as he stands at the center of this apocalyptic moment in the story. The eighth and final illustration is of Chani. She turns, clutching her pregnant abdomen, with her jaw and mouth firmly set. The folds of her robe are beautiful, and the background for this final image is perfect. The desert dunes, the shield wall, and the massive sky behind her are all a hazy wash. So the beautiful lighting and details of the figure truly command the page. This edition of Dune Messiah is very solid, despite a few corners being cut. I would have loved to see unique end papers, perhaps with a map that contains some of the changes that have occurred on Arrakis in the dozen years since the first book, biographies of the contributors, an introduction, and some form of back matter would have also been appreciated. Still, I have to recognize all the efforts that were put into this book, to have it come out as parallel to the first book in the series as it is. Artist Hilary Clark should be especially commended. It can't be easy coming into a project like this and having to emulate the style established by a previous artist, especially one as beloved as Sam Weber. Clark does an admirable job with this task and has produced some lovely original artwork that feels perfectly at home in this series. When they get around to doing the next book in the Chronicles. I mean, come on, that's happening, right? I, for one, would be pleased to see more from this artist. With the problematic printing issues that my old trade paperback edition suffered from, I'm ready to move it to the box of doom, because this is the edition that gets the permanent place on my shelf. And I'll just cross my fingers that there's one more out on the horizon, or maybe four more, that will be joining it soon. As always, thanks for watching, and keep an eye out for future videos. When it comes to the stories you love, it's always worth upgrading your books.